Hey, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. Today we're going to pick up with unit number 12, and we're going to look at the modern civil rights movement. And looking at the modern civil rights movement, we're going to talk about how it begins and how it evolves, of course, from nonviolence, of course, to a more militant approach. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. The focus questions, of course, for Unit 12, identify and describe Kennedy and Johnson's domestic and foreign policy goals, trials, and accomplishments, identify the origin, major players, strategies, and accomplishments of the modern civil rights movement, describe the impact of the Vietnam War on American life and politics, and what impact did the civil rights movement have on other underserved and underrepresented groups in America. We'll start, of course, with the vocabulary. As we always tell you, take out your journals, write down these terms, define them yourself, and we'll try to address as many of them as we can as we approach them in the lesson. We have two lesson focus questions for unit number 12. Lesson number 3, what events can be identified as the beginning of the modern civil rights movement and describe the federal government's response to the call for civil rights starting in 1950s. All right, do now activity, take out your journals, write down the topic. Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896, created the separate but equal doctrine. Recount what that ruling meant in regard to segregation. Go ahead, see if you can remember what Plessy did, and we'll be back in a few minutes to verify verify what you should have gotten. Well, you should have been able to go back and do a little research or do a little thumbing back through in terms of looking at some of the PowerPoints that we've done, some of the lessons that we've created in U.S. history. And in 1896, there was a court case, and it involved a man by the name of Homer Plessy in Louisiana. And what it basically did in this court case, it upheld the doctrine of separate but equal. What it basically said, it was okay to separate the races as long as everything was separate and equal. We're going to find that in 1954, that's going to be challenged by Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and that's going to be the start of the modern civil rights movement. All right, the history of American civil rights. The title father of the civil rights movement could be given to W.E.B. Du Bois. His leadership at the Niagara movement at the turn of the century and his insistence that African Americans demand equality and the use of the court system gain them was central to the movement. The 1950s marked the beginning of the modern civil rights movement with the Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP winning the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka case in 54, which outlawed segregation of public schools, and Brown challenged the separate but equal doctrine, establishing a precedent to attack all segregation. So now that we know that segregation, of course, in America is separate, but it's not equal, this establishes a precedent to attack legally with the court system segregation in American cities and throughout American society. Here you have a picture in the middle, of course, of Thurgood Marshall, who was an NAACP lawyer that argued the case. Now, one of the first incidents in the modern civil rights movement starts in 1955 with Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on the Montgomery bus and sparked the NAACP to use her case to effect the attack on segregation in public transportation. Her case thrust Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into the spotlight as the face of the movement and black churches as the planting grounds for the movement. His advocacy of nonviolent protest to include boycotts and later sit-ins became tools to end segregation. The desegregation of the buses within the Montgomery bus boycott created the confidence needed to end all segregation, whether de jure or de facto segregation. De jure segregation is segregation based on the law, and de facto segregation was segregation based on circumstance. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with King as its president, set out to end inequality in transportation, housing, and accommodations. So the first part of the movement is nonviolent, and the leader of that movement, of course, is Dr. Martin Luther King. Here you have a picture of Rosa Parks shortly after her arrest, of course, for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. Now, we're going to look at the presidents and how they reacted to civil rights. The first president in the 1950s, of course, to kind of deal with the civil rights movement is going to be Eisenhower. Now, in 1954, of course, when Brown is adjudicated, he is president of the United States of America. As president, Eisenhower recognized the importance of ending segregation, but didn't believe that court decisions and laws were the way to achieve desegregation. In other words, he thought that we should appeal to everybody's better angels, and that doing that, men would eventually come around to see fit to provide others, of course, with equality and equal rights. White Citizens Council were set up all over the South to defend segregation and defy the Supreme Court rulings. In 1957, the Little Rock Nine started the integration of Central High School in Arkansas, and the governor of Arkansas at that time was Orville Faubus, and he resisted integration, and Eisenhower, though reluctant, sent in troops to force integration because he understood that federal authority had to be upheld. Here's a picture of the Little Rock Nine on the left, and then a picture of Orville Faubus making a speech denying them access to Little Rock Central High School. Rosa Parks, how it started. We will pause for a few minutes and look at a video activity and look at Rosa Parks' contribution to the Civil Rights Movement. It is from PBS Learning Media. What we want you to do, of course, is to go to the lesson description, access this video, and upon completion of the video, complete the activities, convert your work to a PDF file and turn it to your teacher to be graded. Good luck, and let's get started at this time. All right, you should have had enough time that you were able to go through, of course, and look at that video. We hope you enjoyed it. It is a pretty good video, and it gives you some great insights in terms of Rosa Parks' contribution, of course, to the start of the modern civil rights movement. And once again, make sure that you, of course, convert those activities that you did and to a PDF and turn to your teacher, of course, to be graded. All right, what we're going to do is look at our lesson focus questions for lesson number 4. What events can be identified as the beginning of the modern civil rights movement, and describe the federal government's response to call for civil rights starting in the 1950s. So let's look at those two questions. What events can be identified as the beginning of the modern civil rights movement? Well, the defiance of Rosa Parks, the appointment of Dr. King as leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, the Supreme Court ruling in the Brown case all signaled the beginning of a movement backed by federal law. Describe the federal government's response to the call for civil rights starting in the 1950s. Eisenhower supported civil rights but believed courts were the answer to changing people's hearts, but understood that the law had to be upheld. JFK attempted to address passing a federal civil rights law but was met with resistance from the Southern Democrats. And LBJ convinced Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 over Southern Democrats and his party's disapproval. So what we hope to do, of course, is to give you some ideas or some insights in terms of how it was that the modern civil rights starts, what the tactics were, and of course, who were some of the key players. We hope you had an opportunity, of course, to kind of reflect on some of the things that were said, of course, in terms of the modern civil rights movement. Remember what we always tell you, don't take my word for it. Go ahead and do your own research and draw your own conclusions. And with that, we'll see you next time.